Hmm? Ah! Oh.
My hounds will never harm me.
You haven't fed them in 7 days, you said it yourself.
They're loyal beasts.
They were. Now they're starving.
Stop! Stop! Stop!
Hey, Throners, welcome to our podcast. I'm Jason.
And I'm Duncan.
And I'm Harry.
Yeah, and this is Game of Microphones, episode 26, I think. Yeah, man. Too bad we don't have a very good episode to talk about this week, but we'll just forge through.
What a bummer.
Anyway. I was just telling Duncan and Harry, I have the most notes I've ever had for any podcast in my whole 6 years of podcasting. I have 20 pages of notes here. I can't possibly cover it all. But anyways, before we get into that, I want to welcome Harry. This is your first appearance on Game of Microphones, but you are partner in Podcastica, and you have your podcast Junkies podcast. So welcome.
That's nice.
Welcome,
to be here.
Harry.
Thanks, guys. I'm excited.
Yeah, really excited to have you
Awesome.
aboard. And of course, everyone knows Duncan of the Still Smug Book Talk section fame, among other things.
Are you going to put that on a business card?
Oh yeah, still smug, baby.
That's a good idea. You're one of the least smug persons I know, probably, by the way, I would say.
Thank you.
Except maybe in jest sometimes.
Oh yeah, japery.
So here we go. It's our top 3 highlights of Game of Thrones, Season 6, Episode 9, Battle of the Bastards, which, first off, is probably one of my favorite titles of any episode. I kept wanting to post on Facebook, Battle of the Bastards, guys, aren't you excited? But some people are so averse to spoilers that even that would have been too much, so I didn't do it.
Yeah, I think it's good that you care about that type of thing,
Yeah.
Well, you got to stay off, because I was wandering on like an hour, because we're on a different time zone too, because we're on the West Coast. So I was like, I seen comments like, best episode ever, and I was like, shut down Facebook, shut down
You
Twitter.
turn it off, yeah. Anyway, before we get into our top 3, just in general, what are your general thoughts on it?
Epic. I mean, just it's gonna be so much to talk about, but I think there's probably only 2 or 3 episodes in all of Game of Thrones where I had to stand up, and I had to watch almost all of it, just like literally like standing up in my living room, staring at the screen, and my wife's like, sit down. I'm like, I can't.
Oh my god.
Is she into it like you are?
Yeah, totally.
Duncan?
I agree. This episode was amazing, outstanding, just visually mind-blowing. Every scene there's just chaos everywhere. My heart rate was elevated to probably 3,000%, the average rate, and I felt like I was suffocating when Jon Snow was being buried in those bodies.
I know, and that's what was so awesome about that part. I mean, this episode's really interesting to me because it's groundbreaking filmmaking, I would say, in some ways, and
agreed,
one of the best episodes, if not the best, of the series. And also, it's one of a series that's known for pulling the rug out from under you and just making you go, oh my god. It's one of the more conventional storytelling wise. There's a lot of gray area in the series. This had more black and white, so it's in some ways, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but in some ways it's more conventional, and then in other ways it's just phenomenally extreme. So
yeah, and it's interesting that one of the more conventional episodes is also one of the higher scoring in terms of rankings that I've seen around the web.
Right.
Like, for instance, on IMDb this morning, the episode is rated 10 out of 10 stars.
Yeah.
Wow, that's intense.
I mean, part of that is this show is so good at making us feel like bittersweet or just tragedy, that when they give us something like this that's so satisfying and someone who really deserves to get their due gets it.
Yeah,
we've built up this longing for something
but
like
it's
this.
you just never know, because they've done so much throughout the whole series when you just don't expect something to happen, and then music comes in and you just lose a crazy character. And then this was like, there was all those times when something like that was about to happen. I'm like, oh man. And they have the like sad music coming in when the John's getting suffocated. I
Or
was like,
Oberyn
really?
in the battle. Yeah, you thought maybe that would happen again right
like,
now.
oh man.
Here we
Huge
go
shout out to
again.
Ramin Djawadi, the composer for this show, who's just been killing it lately, tugging
With
on the
the
heartstrings
score,
with the
yeah.
music, big time.
Well, I just wanted to say before we get into Drop 3 that it's an amazing episode when there's 3 full-size dragons, one being ridden by Daenerys Targaryen, laying waste to a fleet of ships, and that takes second fiddle to the other battle in the episode.
That's like a
I was
footnote.
watching that part, just thinking, what has this show become?
Yeah.
You know,
Well, if it starts with that, then you just know like what kind of episode you're in for.
Right.
Oh yeah.
All right, let's get into our top 3. Let's let Harry go first.
I got to go with Yara and Danny. Let's get it on.
Yes.
That was so fun to watch, man. I was waiting for some like just sexy time music.
Yeah.
I mean, there was everything there. The looks they were giving each other, the look on
Yep.
Tyrion's face, and it was just like the whole sexual tension in those couple of minutes was awesome.
I believed
Daenerys
it.
was shooting it right back at her.
Yes. And there was some definite heat going on there. And I loved it. And sometimes I feel like this season is an answer or retribution for last season when they were getting so much flack for how horribly they've treated women.
Yeah.
And they've done that throughout the whole series. And so now, Sansa giving Ramsay what he deserves, but also this scene with the 2 strong women just talking about how, men don't think women can rule, whatever. I'll
How
kill your
about
uncle
that?
for you.
This season, man, the women are overturning the patriarchal society of Westeros like crazy.
Totally.
We got the Sand Snakes and Alaria and Dorne. Got Sansa rising in the north. Daenerys and Yara stepping up big time, making a pact today. And if Varys is going down to Dorne to meet people to raise a rebellion in Westeros, then it's just going to be women running the show during this massive rebellion.
Yeah, pretty much.
That scene had my favorite exchange of the episode. It was Theon says, the Iron Fleet isn't all he's bringing. He also wants to give you, Yara says, his big cock, I think he said.
Yeah.
And Yara says, your offer is also an offer of marriage, you see. You won't get one without the other. Danny says, and I imagine your offer is free of any marriage demands. Yara says, I never demand, but I'm up for anything, really.
I almost died when you said that.
Yara was tit for tat. Like every comment was
Yeah.
like, "Oh yeah, your father was like a bastard," and she's like, "Yeah, yours wasn't too hot either." And at the end,
Yeah,
I mean,
we both have that affliction.
yeah, and Danny said like everyone in the room actually has a pretty shitty father.
And we want to
and
do
it
better.
aired on Father's Day.
Yeah, there's Tywin, Aerys, and Balon
Tywin was
Greyjoy.
killed on Father's Day 2 years ago.
That's so crazy.
I mean, yeah, it's that was good because I had been questioning whether Dany, with her yearning for conquering and that mad, crazy look she got in her eye when she first got on Drogon a couple episodes ago.
Oh, man.
Maybe she's just as bad as anyone, but at least we see that she has the intention and the awareness that the leaders that came before didn't do a good job and that she wants to do better and, as she said, leave the world a better place than what she found. So that's cool.
Definitely. And I was terrified for the beginning of this episode as well, because she had this sort of mad stare going on with her eyes kind of half closed and like really just intensely looking around when she's talking to the slavers, when she's talking to Tyrion. And it just seemed like Mad Queen Daenerys was standing there in full force.
But kudos to Tyrion for talking her off the ledge, man. It's like,
Yeah,
hey, we saw how that
big
ended up
time.
last time, and you might want to tone it down a bit.
Yeah, it was very smart. He said instead of just killing everyone, he didn't say his plan, but we can surmise that it was, well, let's just have the dragons take out a few of these ships to show your strength, and we'll kill a couple of these guys and send the one guy back to tell him what you can do and get everybody else in line.
Yeah.
Grey Worm.
Yeah, shout out
Flawless execution.
shout out to Grey Worm for the Mark of Zorro right there. That was
Yeah, right.
Tyrion was I expected him to say, I said one, but he was like, nah, I guess it's all right. Two's fine.
It's hilarious too. Sometimes in like superhero movies or cartoons, you know, the someone will like jump across the screen with a samurai sword and like slice 3 people's heads off, and they kind of like hold the pose there like a like a badass, and it sort of comes off cheesy at times. But in this episode, Grey Worm slices both those guys' throats and is just standing there holding the pose, and it just worked.
And so symbolic because, I mean, for one thing, it's a dumb idea to appeal to Grey Worm by saying, this guy's lowborn, so you should kill him.
So dumb. He doesn't speak for us.
Not a very good
sounds
idea.
like that's the one we want to survive. Then.
And then he sort of kneeled humbly, and that left the other two standing there proudly in perfect position to have their throats slit.
Something to be said for keeping those knives really well sharpened.
Yeah, definitely.
One more just thing on that scene with Yara and Daenerys. I liked that she didn't want to give up on all the reaving, roving, raiding, and raping, but that's what we do.
Yeah, that was
Well,
hilarious.
I love how they set up that scene with the because they had the previous scene with Yara where she was like in the where all the prostitutes and harlots were hanging out, and she was like hanging out, making out with that other prostitute, and she was like, oh
yeah,
she loves the women, and they're like, okay, and that set it up nicely.
Set
for
the
us.
stage.
Yeah,
the brothel on the long bridge of Volantis.
yeah,
She's basically a guy.
yeah. She's more of a guy than Theon at this point.
Yeah.
Ooh, low blow. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Too soon.
All right, Duncan, number 3.
My number 3 is this episode visually, and that includes cinematography and computer graphics. Like the dragons, for instance, they looked phenomenal in this episode. There's a couple shots where Daenerys just swoops down on a dragon and sort of lifts up as a dragon starts to rise up through the wind, and then immediately following that, the other two break out of their basement prison and come to join Drogon in the sky, and they're just flying in tandem, and it just looked so good, so realistic. I'm watching, at a good 9 feet on a 50-inch plasma screen, so I can get the full definition of the 1080p. And it looked amazing, flawlessly done. Very
We need
impressive.
to see this in virtual reality where we have a saddle so we can be on top of the dragon.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, or the giant. I think the giant looks like
the
totally
giant's
real.
amazing.
Yeah, the giant, just some of the shots, these landscape shots. Yeah, one way, Gwendar one. Like these landscape shots. Go ahead.
No, I was wondering, you talk about Daenerys riding the dragon. Does she always have the same thing she hold on to when she like those two horns?
Good
and
question.
These are my
I was
horns,
wondering about that.
And this is my space. This is my saddle. Like she looks pretty comfy up
She
there.
steers.
The slightest tug on the left, spine, and the dragon knows to turn.
Right.
Squeeze them both, and he shoots fire. I'm wondering how is she able to control these dragons so precisely all of a sudden?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. I would suggest that she has some kind of a telepathic connection with them now.
Yeah,
Probably.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. Dragon blood, they always say the Targaryens have, the Starks have the blood of the North, and they have these connections with their direwolves, at least Bran.
I mean,
And,
she was able to sense Drogon a couple episodes ago. And
Yeah.
hold on a second and go off and hop on. And now she's able to
subtle
control him
hint.
to such a degree that she can stage this whole really imposing entrance, where she gets to talk to the slave masters for a little while, and then right on cue, Drogon comes up.
Yeah,
And
the
then-
negotiations for surrender.
Right, and then right after that, the other two dragons join her. So it seemed very choreographed, and I know just from like doing Walker Stalker that it's tough to get things choreographed like that, much less a couple of dragons. So I think she's.
I love how they broke out right at the moment when Drogon is like flying over, and you're like, you see below, and you're like, they did some sort of C4 explosive on the wall or something like that.
Yeah, just smashed out. I was like, what? How do they do that?
And then the graphics of them destroying the ships was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
The fire and all that.
Yeah, and I loved how they were smart enough to target one ship to show all these other bastards, like, don't fuck with us.
Because they didn't
Give us
want to
your fleet.
destroy all the ships. She needs them.
Good point.
Yeah. Very well played.
Well, I love how you see all the guys on the other ships just jumping out. You see like the little men jumping out.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
They were like
And-
at the ship that was like next to them. You could just see them like just jumping off like ants.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's enough.
and another thing to note about that too is that dragon fire was so hot that it literally split that first ship in two.
Right.
Just split it right down the middle.
Because I didn't, the first time I watched it, I didn't pay close. I was like, just amazed by it and sort of dumbfounded. And then the second time I was like, well, wait a minute. She needs those ships. So were the dragons able to set fire to the men on the ships without destroying the ships? And it's like, oh no, those ships were toast, but they only must have destroyed like 2 or 3 of them. And then everybody else surrendered.
Yeah, I was worried going into it because I knew that the Ironborn were on the way, so I thought that maybe they would be like a hammer and anvil type situation where the walls of Marine would be the anvil, the slavers' fleet would be the nail, for instance, and then the hammer would be the Greyjoys coming in from behind. So I was worried that the dragons might not know to differentiate between friends and foes, and that a lot of this fleet would be destroyed.
Where are those dragons right now?
Chilling.
Which
they're going around roasting some sheep, probably.
Probably. Man, when they're hungry, they've been down there for a while.
So, but
Drogon
before we get off
big.
visual effects, just a couple of things with the giant, because that's another one that jumps out at me.
Please.
Just how he looked so good, but he tore that one dude in half. That was awesome. And then he like smacked a horse to the side, and you heard it go.
And that horse had a headless rider on it. Did you guys?
I saw that.
No.
Yeah, it was Sleepy Hollow thing going on there.
Yeah, he rode by without a head, and John kind of looked up like, what the hell is that? With Tormund, there's just blood squirting out, arterial pulses, and then one just, boom, wrecks it.
There was another scene where John was fighting somebody in the battle, and then a horse just rammed right into the dude and carried him off screen. And then John's like, "All right, fight somebody else now."
Yeah, John's sitting there, and the guy when the horse actually hit the guy that John was fighting. Yeah, that was hilarious.
I mean, just the epic nature of the whole scene. I was getting nervous. I was just like, with everything that was going on. Obviously, a lot of it is the CGI, because they only use, I think, like 40 or 80 horses, I think what it was, they were saying in one of the other follow-ups, but the fact that they were just made you feel like you were literally like in the middle of it, and he's just turning left and right, and he's just missing stuff, and you're like, whoa, how's he getting so lucky? But then it's like, okay, maybe it's prophecy that he's meant to get this far, right?
Yeah, they showed,
right. Maybe the Lord of Light is actually on his side.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that was one of my notes. Is like, are we seeing divine intervention take place here? There's waves and waves of arrows. Ramsay's like, notch, draw, loose, just launching hundreds and hundreds of arrows, and they're just falling in nice tight circles right around Jon Snow.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of R2D2 and C3PO with all the stormtrooper fire.
Yeah. Bolton's equals
no, that one.
Stormtroopers.
Well, the two things on the arrows is that one, as they keep coming in waves, he just turns his back on one wave, and they like hit everyone else around him.
Yeah, he like kind of drops on his knees and turns his back, and
then
it's a little ridiculous, to be honest.
But I love the one shot of, I think, the first wave of arrows, and you just follow the arrow, and you're up in the air, and the arrow's like right at your eye level, and you're just like seeing like.
It's arcing.
Yeah,
you hear the whistling of the winds.
Oh,
so suddenly you're very far away from the battle, and then all of a sudden you're right back in it.
Yeah. They did the same thing with the first shot of the episode with the launch in Marine, where the black pitch fireball.
Yeah, they show like this tar ball or whatever being placed into the catapults, and then they light it on fire, and then you see it shoot off.
Yeah,
that was an awesome way to start the episode.
It was.
And I thought it was that was at Winterfell for a second. Just for a second. But okay, my turn. So number 3 is that this episode kind of is a climax to a few things that have long been coming. People have been waiting for Ramsay to get what's coming for him.
Oh yeah.
Jon Snow to activate as a leader and do something other than protect the wall. The Starks to retake Winterfell. And even Littlefinger to make a move. That's a lesser thing, but he's been talking about that for a while. Dany to utilize these dragons in battle. So all these things that we've been waiting for have suddenly happened all in one episode, which I think is awesome. But it just brought to mind to me how Game of Thrones is an amazing show, and also a lot of times people are stuck places, and you want them to get going, get out of there. Like Tyrion and Dany, especially Dany in Marine.
Yeah.
Like, okay, enough with that. Or Arya at the House of Black and White. Sansa at King's Landing. She was stuck there with Joffrey at first, and then with Ramsay at Winterfell later. Ned at King's Landing. Well, I guess you could say he was stuck there, called to be Hand of the King. He didn't seem like he really wanted to be there. Theon
in Ramsay's basement. Oh, you're just going to say that?
Yeah. Yeah. And even before that, he was prisoner of the Starks
Yeah.
for most of his life.
Ward, I think the term is.
Yeah, Ward.
Jon Snow stuck up at the wall. But things have been loosening up on multiple fronts lately, especially in this episode. For example, Daario arrives with the Dothraki army to fight the Sons of the Harpy, and just everything else that's happening in Meereen made me wonder, okay, Tyrion says the economy is doing well. Maybe Dany's problems with Meereen will be largely over after this, and maybe it'll be time for her to move on. I don't know. One can only hope, I would say. And then we've seen Starks walking away from all these things lately. Jon walked away from the wall. Arya walked out of the House of Black and White and said she was going home. And in this episode, Sansa walks away from the corpse of Ramsay as it's being devoured by his dogs. And so that's...
Don't forget Rickon walking away from Ramsay.
That's
He did walk at first.
Yeah.
You have to run, remember?
Get too far. He should have ran faster. So it
He
just
should have
feels like
serpentined also.
Yeah, what's up with that, man?
a lot of satisfaction going on is what I'm saying.
Yeah, lots of satisfaction. Oh man, it's like this episode was just like a giant level up for the show, and in a number of different ways.
Well, after disappointing, people for so long with, turns and just killing off characters, it's almost nice to see like there's actually some comeuppance, and he's, George R. R. Martin is not that much of a bastard, that he's gonna totally pull the rug every single time out from under us.
See, I wonder because I feel like we're definitely getting into areas now that aren't covered by the books that have already been released, and this makes me wonder whether or not they're. I feel like George R. R. Martin has been more distant from the show lately. He used to write episodes, and now he doesn't. And he said a couple of things in the news that made me feel like he's been dissatisfied with the way just little things have been going.
Really?
So I wonder if I don't like that. And even though I do feel satisfied by all this, I have to admit there's a part of me that's like, oh, don't stray too far from what makes Game of Thrones great.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, it's like, well, maybe at the end of the Game of Thrones story, that is when the good guys get to win.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of on the fence about all that. But I do worry. And I wish they would just get George R. R. Martin in to write a couple of episodes here and there. He doesn't need to hurry up and write the books anymore so much since the show's already passed it up. So I'd like him to write a couple episodes.
Yeah, that'd be cool. And maybe every masochist likes a kiss better than a punch every once in a while. Like this audience is just a bunch of masochists that enjoy being punished by the show repeatedly and repeatedly. And then, one of the highest rated episodes at this point is one where there's big victories in our favor. So
yeah, I mean, even after everything I've been talking about, I land on the side of I'm happy to see the good guys win here and that there to be a payoff.
Yeah, there's some comeuppance needed every once in a while.
Yeah. But I wouldn't.
Definitely.
But we have 2 more seasons left.
Yeah.
If this just becomes a conventional show now where the good guys win most of the time and there's no more rug pulling out, I'm not going to like that.
No, I don't think so. I don't think it's
I'm
going
sure
to.
you
There's
won't
still a lot of
you won't be
people we like
disappointed. Yeah, there'll be
that
some
can die. Yeah,
beloved characters getting the end.
we still got plenty of people to lose. Plenty of ways they can torture us.
Okay, thanks guys. I feel better now.
Yeah, I know.
All right, Harry.
I think just coming back to the battle, it's just the overall theme of like the horrors of war. And I'm thinking back to like past movies, maybe Saving Private Ryan, Braveheart.
Yes.
But just the bodies piling up, and that's apparently like that's what happened in some of the Civil War battles, and just kind of like the whole ugliness of war was just really, really front and center. I mean, and the way they did it was just so in your face that you're like, this is so brutal and just a horrible way to like conduct. I mean, now it's a bit cleaner with drones and stuff, but you don't even think about the fact that this is literally how war was waged back in the day.
Yeah, it seemed very authentic. And part of that, I think a lot of the battle was sort of shown from Jon Snow's point of view.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it made it feel more personal. Harry, I mean, I know, was there a part of you that was like, oh man, this isn't good for my soul. I don't want to be seeing this.
You know what's so funny? Because that happens more, I think, with something like Walking Dead than Game of Thrones. Because I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's almost horror, but I'm not saying it's justified horror, but it's just the ugliness of war, right? And it is what it is, and whoever's left standing is winning, and in order to do that, I mean, they had the guy with no legs crawling up the body of mountain.
Yep, and 1 second before that, another guy screaming, "Help me!"
Yeah,
you
it
know.
was just
No one's gonna help that guy.
sort of. But the way the camera was moving reminded me a lot of that scene from The Revenant when they had the attack on the camp with the Indians, and it was just you were just jumping back and forth, and you're like, what's going on? Like, who do I follow? Like, who's gonna die next? And it was just crazy how they were just stepping on each other, and it was gruesome, but it was fascinating to watch.
It was portrayed very intensely. Like, they really got the horror of the scene to shine through. There was that part where before the battle when Jon was talking to Sansa, and he said, I fought worse than Ramsay north of the Wall. And maybe on an individual basis, brainless whites and White Walkers might be worse than Ramsay, as a person. But this battle was just horrific and easily contended with anything that happened at Hardhome. Like, the level of just purely like organized, diabolical, scheming and the level of organization that with all these arrows flying everywhere, the guys with the shields forming the phalanx around them. It's scary what organized humans with evil intent can do as opposed to brainless whites.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, but the battles that Jon Snow has fought that we've seen have been very straightforward. And this battle had a lot of psychology going on in it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get into that, though, because that's going to be my next point. So where are we?
We are at my number 2, I believe.
Yeah, Duncan's number 2.
And my number 2, going back to the authenticity of the battle and what I just mentioned, the phalanx forming. That's actually my number 2, is the phalanx that Ramsay sent out to enclose the Jon Snow's group of the wildlings, the Mormonts, and the Stark forces up against that body wall. You guys know what a phalanx is?
It's
Yes.
that sounds very phalanxy.
Yeah, that's it.
I loved that. I've never seen anything quite like the way that was presented before, and I loved it because it seemed kind of alien because you couldn't see the people. And the coordination of it, I don't know, the visual was amazing, and it looked like, oh shit. It was kind of like the garbage compactor scene in Star Wars.
But it's just the genius, it's like the strategic aspect of it, of like, if that's Ramsay's call, or just the fact that he's directing these troops, from the top of the hill, and it seems like at that point, like it's that, the chess game, and he's made this one move that you're like, holy shit, like how the hell are they gonna get out of that one?
Yeah, and the thing is, when Davos, the night before they were talking battle strategy, Sansa's like, you think you upset him, but if you're playing his game, you're gonna lose. You can't. Yeah. He's not going to fall for your tricks. And then Davos says they wanted to coax Ramsay to the center and then surround him on 3 sides. And Jon said that they were digging trenches so the opposing army couldn't attack them from all sides. So if they had stuck to that, where they had they also said, you have to be patient, lay back. We need them to charge us. So if they stuck to that, then Ramsay's army supposedly would have charged them. They would have been in this protected area where that maneuver wouldn't have worked because of the trenches. But instead, Jon did exactly what Sansa warned him against, which was to let him. Sansa also told him, Rickon's not going to survive this. Don't even think about it. So if Jon Snow would have just listened to Sansa and not fallen for it, but instead he charged out to try and save Rickon, and then his loyal men followed him out into vulnerable, unprotected ground, and then that phalanx happened. So he blew it. And then the only reason that they were saved is because Sansa had the foresight to write that letter to Littlefinger. So Sansa tried to save the day in one way, but Jon Snow wouldn't listen to her, and then her plan B came into action, and she saved it.
John basically did everything that was the opposite of what Sansa said to
Yeah.
do. Like, don't go out to, don't let him play you. Don't let him like do some
Right.
reverse strategy. And he literally fell into every single trap that Ramsay laid out.
And there's a part of me that loves him for it.
yeah, of course.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Right?
that's his whole heart on his sleeve. He's like, I don't
Yeah.
give a shit. Like,
And also, he may have listened to her more intently and followed, her instructions more intently if he had all the information. She withheld the fact that they would be reinforced by, 10 times the soldiers.
That's
which is
true.
kind of
Yeah.
sort of brings up an interesting concept because if she was real quick to write off Rickon, say we're not going to get him back. We need to focus on what's important. Winning strategically, which is a valid point. But then she allows Jon Snow to put himself in a position of risking everything and risking his own life, potentially sacrificing it. When she knew that they would have reinforcements coming along.
so how much do we know about the timing on that though?
Good question. It's really hard to tell on this show.
Because he said you go with the army that you have,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Yeah.
were arguing.
I
back
mean,
and forth.
There is an argument to be made that Sansa should have told him, hey, I wrote this letter. We may be getting reinforcements. You might want to wait a little while until we get a response or something.
Remember that scene when Baelish said, planted the seed of doubt in her mind and said, he's your half-brother.
Yeah.
Just like Catelyn thought that he would be a threat to the standing of her children, that seed of doubt has been planted in Sansa's mind. Maybe she was willing to let Jon sacrifice himself and remove himself from her control, from being an object preventing her from being in control, theoretically, in order to clear the way for herself, knowing the Vale was going to come in to help so that she would be the top dog no matter what, and Jon wouldn't be able to create a military
Do you think
coup.
that's what's going on?
I don't know. I mean,
I don't think so.
I hope not, but look at Sansa. She was never like, she was always kind of she was the bratty one a little bit. She lied about what happened with Arya and Nymeria, and claimed that Nymeria and Arya attacked Joffrey when it was really Joffrey who was the aggressor, and it resulted in her direwolf being put down and Nymeria being lost. And so this kind of prissy, bratty girl sort of goes through a whole bunch of psychological and physical torment, and now it has a chance to be in a position of power. How much has her psychology changed with the influence of Littlefinger behind her? She could be, he could be pushing her towards this scheming, manipulative direction, which may not be the way we want her character to go.
Yeah,
I don't necessarily think it's accurate.
Did happen, my first thought is no, but now I'm like, yes, actually, that would be more of, okay, Game of Thrones is back to its old self,
right? If Sansa
one of
turns out to
the
be a bad
Starks.
guy.
Yeah, one of the Stark, because the Starks have, traditionally been like everyone's hero, right? And
noble
what if
and honorable.
Yeah. What if there's one that just totally flips the script and gets Benedict Arnold on us?
But I would be surprised. I don't think that's what's going on. But
I hope not.
Maybe.
I mean,
I kinda
tears
hope
of
so.
joy are shed when Stark banners, fall over Winterfell again for the first time in years, but then immediately we get a gut punch when a Stark goes bad.
Well, speaking of, even though Jon Snow didn't heed any of Sansa's advice, when she confronted Ramsay the day before, she said, "You're going to die tomorrow, Lord Bolton. Sleep well." I thought there was a pretty good chance she was right.
Oh, yeah.
Well, she
was certainly confident.
Yeah.
We knew she had a little finger in her back pocket, so to speak.
Oh, speaking of that, I guess HBO released a higher definition picture of the letter that she wrote to the Vale, and in it mentions that he would be compensated to some degree for putting everything on the line and bringing the Vale people in after she had told him off, essentially. So I wonder what's in it for him, why he wants to help. Is he really in it for Sansa, or is there some type of bonus waiting for him?
They teased a little bit out in next episode, so a
Oh,
little conversation happening there. So.
Yeah,
interesting.
but Dunk doesn't like to hear about that kind of stuff. All right, my turn, right? So we already covered a bunch of my points, which is good, but I'm going to just talk about a few more things about the battle itself that I enjoyed. I liked seeing everyone standing in formation ahead of time and just quietness. You know, the calm before the storm with ominous music, and then there were like a few flayed burning men set out on the battlefield for decoration. Which I kind of wondered where
I
did.
I was wondering about that too. Well, they prepared
Ramsey
pick a
just
few
found
guys
couple
out
people
from the
he didn't
stables.
like.
Yeah. Or was it prisoners or what? I like that it was from John's point of view. When he's all alone out there and the Bolton forces are charging at him right after Rickon gets killed and there's dramatic music swelling up in the background, he pulled out his sword and then he threw his scabbard away.
Oh,
Kind of took a breath. And I thought that meant he thought, well, I'm not going to need this ever again because I'm about to die.
Yeah.
that was my
was
favorite
good.
shot of the whole episode was John standing there, the shot from behind where he, first he's looking out over the army as the cavalry is closing in on him, and he just has this look where it's him versus the world, and it just looks totally hopeless. He drops his scabbard, pulls out Longclaw, and he's sort of bouncing there in a fight stance waiting for all those guys on the horses that are just charging
I'm
him.
gonna do my best.
And
Yeah.
there's no way he's going to survive that. If you look at those horses, they're so tightly packed together that if the sword doesn't get him, he's going to get run down and trampled. There's no way that
There's
he
no
could
out
possibly survive that. And he starts to charge at the last second, right as his own cavalry catches up and overtakes him.
Slam together.
And they slam together like... Oh my God, that side shot where they finally overtake him and clash with the other cavalry, and there's just horses flying back and forth in every direction. It was like the most intense dynamic change I've ever seen.
Yeah.
They said when they were shooting that scene that that cavalry was really coming up on them, and their horses are so
Yeah.
well trained that they can just pull them up at like the last moment. But Kit Harington was like, "Yeah, the horses were pretty close."
Apparently, there's
Yeah,
lots of real
scary.
stunts going on, like people flying off horses, getting hit by swords. A lot of that was real stunts.
The guy who directed it is Miguel Sapochnik, who also directed Hard Home.
Yes.
They brought him back in, and I'd love to see him direct an episode of Walking Dead, by the way.
Oh, man.
He said this is the most logistically complicated thing he's ever been involved in. And in the news section later, I'm going to read from a long interview where he talks about all the specifics and complexities of doing all this stuff.
I mean, this rivaled anything you'd see in a movie theater easily.
Absolutely. I was wondering when I was watching this, how many film directors quit after seeing this episode?
I mean, it's better than, even though some of the battles in Lord of the Rings are bigger, this felt more visceral or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
So visceral.
The CGI is improving so much. I remember one of the first
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings. It was pretty bad. Like,
Yeah. We've talked about a little bit, Jon Snow being trampled and buried under bodies was very claustrophobic and really not like anything I've ever seen, and so great. And I found out, and you'll hear in this interview, that was all improvised because the thing that they had planned on doing just wasn't going to work out.
Wow. That was my
So-
number one. That's like,
Yeah. Well, I won't talk about it too much.
oh, it's all right. I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah, so good. I really liked that Ramsey refused to fight John one-on-one, and then in the battle, John is right in the middle of it while Ramsey's safely away with his bowmen screaming at them to fire their arrows.
Yeah. Another real interesting parallel that was drawn from that scene between from Ramsey and John when he challenges him to the fight was before that, Grey Worm had said to the Master's fighters, the slave fighters, are you guys willing to fight for somebody who's definitely would not be willing to fight for you, or would you rather go home to your families? And they all dropped their swords, dropped their spears, and left the Masters unprotected. And then after Ramsey turned down Jon Snow, he had said to him, you think they'll fight for you when they find out you wouldn't fight for them?
Right. So that means Jon Snow and Daenerys will make a great couple. Because they have the same values.
Yeah, aunt and nephew, that'd be weird.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't have
Harry.
proof, so it's cool.
so mine is like a two-part of this whole Sir Davos's incredible nighttime vision. when he's able to fly.
Yeah.
Oh,
Home
yeah.
in on.
and then leading up to his, he's gonna have an encounter with Melisandre, and the fact that apparently all she does is really just stare into fire.
She seems very lost at this point. She used to be a lot more confident in her visions. Now she's sort of like, well, I get these signs and I just follow them and hopefully it all works out. I don't really know.
Yeah, those are some of my notes. I had Miss Melisandre is still so shell-shocked at this point. She seems really unconfident. And I think one of the other things, when John was asking her, what's the purpose? And she says, oh, maybe it just brought you back to die this time,
Yeah.
It's not very inspiring.
She had said before with confidence to Davos that Jon Snow is the chosen one, Azor Ahai resurrected. He's the prince that was promised. So I felt like her attitude change here may have reflected a change in her, in the way that she believes, the way she handled Stannis working out. Like she told Stannis, you're the chosen one, you're the prince that was promised, and it affected their judgment and affected the way that they went about things. So maybe she feels like it's important that Jon isn't made over cocky or feels like he has to live up to this prophecy, and that he'd be better on his own to do it without influence from this prophecy.
When did she say that she thought Jon was the prince that was promised?
She was standing with Davos at Castle Black.
Before Stannis died or after?
Afterwards. It was this season, after Jon was resurrected. I think it was the next episode.
Okay. Okay.
And he's like, well, you thought Stannis was, and she's kind of like, yeah.
Do you feel like Jon is obviously indebted, forever to Melisandre for bringing him back, but I'm wondering if they now have some sort of connection that is going to play itself out beyond the conversation, because I thought of all the people like he would talk to, like the fact that they spent a couple of minutes on the both of them like prior to the battle, says something about what is the fact that he wanted her feedback, and
it means something to him.
Yeah, it is interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I had been wondering where the heck she's been the last few episodes, but. There's something about they wanted to show the contrast in her. I don't know. That's a good question. They also just bringing up the Lord of Light and then how he seemed to have a lot of luck during the battle did make me think maybe he has the gods on his side.
Yeah, that's a good point.
He had a lot of luck.
Speaking of Davos, for one thing, I really liked the little walk that he and Tormund took.
Yeah, two fan favorites together.
Some comic relief there.
Yeah, and also just the fact Tormund's like, you love that cunt Stannis and I love the man he burned. There's an acknowledgement that they used to be on opposing sides, but they're just like, forget that, we know what's important.
Pretty
now.
Impressive, actually.
Pretty cool.
What I like was Tormund was funny. He had these couple of moments when they were doing the battle strategy, and Jon was or I think that was talking about a pincer move. And
Mm-hmm.
And then Tormund was like staring at them like nothing, knows nothing about like these like battlefield terminology and stuff like that. So
his eyes kind of like flick back and forth like a cartoon.
Oh, you mean like squeeze people in a circle? He's like, okay, I get that. And then later when they're walking with Davos, he's like, we saw demons in his eyes, and he's like, real demons? Like, did you really see?
Yeah.
So he's got this like
he's very literal.
For everything. I thought it was funny.
As far as like battle savviness, I would say Tormund is to Jon Snow as Jon Snow is to Ramsay.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
And then Davos finding that stag that he carved for Shireen, do you guys think that he figured out what happened just from seeing that?
He saw that pyre. He
looked
looked back at the camp like, Melisandre, I know you did this.
That's her MO, right?
Oh, yeah. They had hinted at it previously, so he knew that it was an option. But one other thing I wanted to say about Tormund and Davos walking along talking was something that Davos said. He said, maybe that was our mistake, believing in kings. Mm-hmm. And one of them says, well, Jon Snow's not a king. But you know what? Neither is Daenerys, so it sets the stage for potentially the rise of a queen.
Right. I mean, it's interesting how this show continually has these epic episodes that it one-ups itself after the battle at Blackwater.
Yeah,
Castle Black,
Blackwater.
I mean.
Oh, yeah, Castle Black.
Castle Black.
Interestingly,
And then
Castle Black and
Hard Home.
Blackwater were both filmed by the same director, too. And now we have Hard Home and Winterfell Battles that were filmed by the same director.
A different director.
Yeah. Yep, a different director.
So, yeah, that's right. Blackwater, then Castle Black, and then Hard Home. Each one one-upping itself. And I would say this one, I know I love zombies, but this one probably one-upped Hard Home.
Yeah.
But we got to get to see, I think, the grandest battle of all are when the White Walkers attack.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
The second to last episode of the
I
series.
can't even imagine. I hope there's like 6 or 7 episodes of that. You know,
just that battle.
I want to see those pale white hunting spiders.
Yeah, maybe it won't just be one battle.
It's such a culmination. I mean, there's so much imbued in that battle, like tying everything up, and so much meaning in that they're gonna have to obviously top this one, but there's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, Jason, you were worried about, what if they just start winning battles? You know, it won't be the show that we all fell in love with. Well, I think they're going to lose a lot of battles to the White Walkers as they make their way south towards King's Landing. There's going to be a lot of deaths of people that we like, a lot of retreating from brave heroes that we like and don't want to see lose. And there's going to be a lot of tears before there's a victory over the White Walkers.
There's shortened seasons, right? The next 2?
Yeah, supposedly.
Yeah. I don't know if they've officially said it, but the word I've read is
7 and 6.
A 7 and 6. Okay.
Ugh, that's what I've heard.
They got to kill a lot of our favorite characters between now and then.
Well, the last episode is just going to be the White Walkers killing everyone. That's it.
Yeah.
All right. My turn? Or your turn, Duncan?
My number 1 was John being buried alive, which we kind of talked about. It was great. You know, just the whole, like, I literally felt like I was suffocating when I was watching that. I couldn't breathe. There was shots from his perspective looking upwards and seeing just flashes of shadow crossing the screen, flickering with the sunlight just blasting in between these shadows, and you couldn't tell what was happening. It just gave it a real chaotic, scary feeling. And they kept showing other people that were being trampled. There was a guy whose head was like underneath a cape or like a bag or something, and he kind of raised his head for a second, and then all of a sudden a foot stomps down on it, and he's just getting pummeled by these stomping feet, and just people trapped, and just the visceral carnage, the carnage of this scene was just unparalleled.
I mean, as much credit as the obviously the directors get, I mean, the editors need a tip of the hat as well, because I mean, it's just, it literally puts you in that scene, in that feeling of being suffocated and
breathless
pacing of the cuts.
Yeah, exactly.
And the choice of the shots and coordinating it with the orchestration, the scoring is huge. The editing is monstrous.
I'm going to go ahead and just read that part of the interview with director Miguel Sapochnik, since we're talking about it.
Great.
So this is from Entertainment Weekly. They say, I know that when shooting, you look for story and character moments along the way. Is there a good example of that? He says, one day in the middle of shooting Battle of the Bastards, there was a moment when I realized we just could not complete the sequence as planned. 3 days of constant rain had turned the field into a bog 9 inches deep, with mud so thick things were slowing down, and morale with it. The crew are a tough bunch, but when the wind and rain is blowing in your face 13 hours a day and for weeks on end, and it's literally a game of death to make it up the hill to grab a drink or use the loo because it's so slippery, everyone gets a bit down. One evening I got home and I kind of knew we couldn't finish in the time we had left, so I wrote a long email to David and Dan and the other producers to suggest an alternative that I thought we could achieve in the remaining time. But that would mean going off book for 3 days. That is to say, we'd be shooting without a script. I finished the email and made a cup of tea, no whiskey in the house, then waited for the response, which I fully expected to be a public chastisement and general reaming for even suggesting to Dan that. It was late already, and if we're going to do this, we needed to employ this idea first thing the next day. I hadn't even worked out exactly how I'd do it. I just knew we needed a plan B. Anyway, not 15 minutes later, I get a ping on the email, and David and Dan have replied. They said it sucked not to be able to finish as scripted, and you're fired. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh.
But they also understood the crunch we were in, and they trusted me and to have at it. I think that this section of the fight, in which John is almost buried alive by a stampede of panicking wildlings, turned out as one of my favorite little moments in the sequence. No virtual effects, no fighting, just Kit giving a stellar performance and a crazy top shot as he pushes his way back out. We affectionately called it the rebirthing shot.
Wow.
The other reason I liked it is because of what it meant to be allowed to follow my gut and go for it. That kind of trust you can't buy, and it felt like a privilege to have been given that kind of support to go into uncharted territory by the producers in such a high-stakes game.
Yeah, and I mean, just having that kind of backing by your managers, your management, and any type of job is awesome. But especially when it comes to this, them having the confidence in this director to make that kind of call on the fly, and having it work out so well. I really wonder what the sequence was that they were unable to complete.
I know, huh? He didn't say.
It couldn't be better, though, right?
It was
right?
White Walkers.
But it turned out to be such a defining, almost a shot, like when he comes out for air and the camera's pulling out, and it's if you think about one of the moments that stands out for you in terms of the whole battle, the rise and the fall and the emotions that they're carrying people through, it was just like we're just gasping along with him, right? Because he actually takes the physical gasp of air.
He does.
It pops out.
And
it's amazing.
You watch, like any Michael Bay movie, and it's just horrible in my opinion. And you can't tell what the hell's going on, and there's just punching and explosions, and it's like wall to wall. And this battle is so regimented and dynamic. There's close-up scenes, there's quiet scenes.
Yeah, the dynamics were just phenomenal.
Yeah.
The beauty of it is that it appeared unscripted, which just goes to, it speaks to, I can't imagine just how scripted every single shot was, but to really give you this sense of randomness, which is really what at the end of the day, what a battle like that would be about.
Mm-hmm.
I love when TV shows have dynamic range over long time frames, over episode to episode and within an episode, and even just within this one battle scene there was some really intense broad scenes and some close-up quiet scenes, and so it just made it feel like a little story in and of itself. Plus it was the whole psychological thing playing out of how Ramsay outsmarted Jon Snow, so it's just very good.
Yeah, and it's interesting how different music and dynamics can affect a scene. Like the scene where Jon Snow is being suffocated, and everybody's just climbing up this hill of bodies, and there's this real slow, sad sort of Stark theme song playing, a sad version of it that just seems hopeless and just really melancholy. At the same time, it's a choice. I wonder who made the choice. If it was the director that instructed Javadi on how to do like a sad theme here, or if he did it himself. You could have replaced that music with headbanging, thrashing metal music, and it would have been effective in a different type of way. You know what I mean? So the music,
of course.
the music could
makes a huge
creating
difference.
Dynamic shifts. Yeah, it can totally affect the underlying tone of a scene.
And the other part of it was the fact that because it was on TV, there's a lot of context in terms of what we're seeing. Because if it was a movie, you wouldn't have been able to have some of these character arcs over the span of 2 hours, as opposed to like all these seasons, because all that is in our mind, right? He died once, he's coming back again. Is Ramsay really going to get away? And how there were so many pieces that like led up to this moment, and I think they sort of like layered onto the scene, and you have all this context as you're watching it, I think, which makes it that much more dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Of course, with these days, like with Marvel, you have 20 movies and a couple of TV series. but no, totally, yeah, and that's why TV is in a lot of cases better than movies these days, in my opinion. But as far as music goes, there was this one little thing I saw one time where it just showed this guy walking like down a hallway or something, and they played some peppy music behind it, dun, 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 and it seemed like he was kind of the hero going to do something great, and then they played ba ba ba, like ominous music, and it totally changed with the same footage, totally changed the feel of
totally
the scene.
changes the feel.
Well, you've seen what they've done. Sometimes they take the Breaking Bad like trailer and they put like this, the '80s Family Ties music on it.
Yeah.
I love that.
There's if anybody's interested, I recommend listening to an analysis of the Game of Thrones music, and they take a certain theme like the Reigns of Castamere or any given family's musical motifs and theme, and Ramin Djawadi, just like by changing a couple notes or by changing the chords underneath the melody or by changing the tempo, you can draw and totally different feels out of these songs. Podcast Winterfell does some great analysis. It's a trained, professional musician that does the podcast, and he has this segment called Clef Notes, and it's a really in-depth look at the music and these subtle changes in themes that can really affect the way that you feel and draw emotion out in a very like strategic and planned way.
Or play when characters get a certain theme and you might not even understand on a conscious level, but that music comes up and it brings up all the memories of that person or feelings about them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there's instances where they've done the same mixture of the scene and a favorite character is about to die, and they cued the music that would like set the stage for that, and then they've done it. What they did here is because the way the music was playing when Jon Snow was getting trampled, I was like, they almost were this foreboding of like, okay, this is the part where your favorite character dies.
Yeah,
cue that music.
It's beautiful.
All right.
It's just amazing to see how it's possible to be affected that way in terms of just having music play over. So I recommend researching more into the music.
I'm trying to decide what I want to do for my number one. I think what stands out that we haven't talked about yet is just Ramsay's death, and that he seemed pretty confident and cocky, even up to the point where Jon Snow was repeatedly smashing him in the face. He still had a smile on his face.
Tyler Durden moment.
Yeah. He kind of relaxed into it. And then when Sansa came to visit him, he was like, so this is where I'm going to live now. And then he saw the look on her face. Okay, I guess, our time has come to an end. So he understood that he was going to die. And yet he was like, but I'm still going to be a part of you because of what I did to you. He was still being evil and smug. Mm-hmm. And the moment where he finally got to see him get worried and rattled and then terrified was when he realized that his dogs were about to eat him.
Yeah,
which he kind of did to himself, God. So that was cool because he starved them for 7 days.
Yeah, and it was foreshadowed on a couple occasions. I mean, obviously he fed Fat Walda and his half brother to his dogs, but in the scene before that, right before Roose was murdered by Ramsay, he said, if you act like a rabid dog, you're going to be treated like a dog. You're going to be taken out back, put down, and used as pig feed. And essentially, that's exactly what happened here, except it was dogs instead of pigs. He was just put in a cell, no fanfare, no public execution, just like an anonymous prisoner, just in a cell and just fed to the animals.
Yeah, when you think about all the different ways that he could have or deserved to die, we probably could have come up with a list of just like, how would we like to see him go out?
Like butt fucked to eternity or flayed or something.
Have Ghost eat him. I heard a lot of people saying, they thought it would be poetic justice for him to be eaten by dogs, and Ghost was thrown out there a number of times.
So do you think that people who hate him with a passion feel like this was enough?
I think so.
I think
he got his just desserts.
I mean, I as much as you want to see him like get his come up
prolonged.
Just that I did cringe in that one like second when the dog just snapped at his face. I was like, wow, that's got to talk about a horrible way to like go.
That black dog with the light shining off its hair at dynamic angles, that profile shot where the dog is leaning up towards Ramsay's face and licks the blood, and then he kind of steps back a step and he's got his mouth open and his tongue is sort of fluttering in the air. It's just one of the creepiest things I've ever seen.
Well, what got me was him going, "Rah, rah," and then his voice turned kind of inhuman when
Yeah, it just went.
when the
Well, he
dog
got no jaw at that.
yeah bit into his throat.
Exactly.
It sounded. I think they used some squealing pigs in there for sound effects. I'm not sure about that, but I think so. I think some people, you know, when you think about how he, with Theon and Sansa, tortured them both over long periods of time, they might not think this was good enough. I don't want to see. I don't want to think about that. But that happening to anybody. But I could see where somebody might go, no, she let him off too easy.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people who think that. Oh, did you guys think he reminded you of Hannibal Lecter at all in that scene? He's kind of sitting
Now that
there
you mention
bound
it,
in the
yeah,
chair, and Sansa walks up and he goes, "Hello, Clarice." I mean, hello, Sansa. Yeah.
That guy, I don't know how to pronounce his name. Rian, that's the actor. It's Iwan. Anyway, he's awesome, and I think he should get a lot of kudos for this role.
Yeah.
And he's so good at playing that role.
He's so hated.
I mean, you're going to
and-
see him for a long time
Yeah.
in other movies. You're going to be like, I can't even see, like, if he's in a movie like The Notebook or something. I'm like, he's going to kill you.
Yeah, stay away. I mean, I'm sure
he's gonna cut your
it'd
fingers
be
off.
really tough for him not to get typecast at this point. He needs to like go on Sesame Street or something.
Hide your
or
dicks,
give up
hide your
acting.
wife, hide your dicks, hide your wife.
Yeah.
He could go on Sesame Street and flay Big Bird. No, that's horrible.
Oh,
Pluck all his feathers
I'll
out.
pick off one feather at a time.
That is so
we just
bad.
lost the whole
I
Sesame Street
know.
contingent there.
Sorry, kids.
Do you guys think Sansa's pregnant?
I don't.
Because he was like, now I'm a part of you.
That's interesting.
Ha 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 ha. You know, like confident, like something was living on.
I hope not. That's too soap opera-ish. How would he know? I think it's because he heard
Maybe
her.
Aunt Flo didn't come to visit last month.
But wouldn't she know? We're going to cover that.
She said to Baelish, you know, she could feel what he did to her inside her still.
That's going to be in. Somebody wrote an email about that, I think. So
all right.
talk more about
Cool.
it later. I have a few more notes. It was awesome to see the Stark banner come down from the rampart. Wasn't
Yup.
that great? That was a
Aw.
great moment.
That was a nice.
Tears of joy were shed in that moment around the country and world, I'm sure.
But doesn't that sort of presume then that the Starks are in control? And so who is that? It must be Sansa, right? She's the head.
Yeah.
Couldn't be Jon.
Yep, I think that's
joint
Sansa right
custody
there.
right there.
And I was
So they just logistics wise, they just always carry the banners in case they won. That got
yeah,
ready.
they just keep them in the basement in case the person comes back and conquers. They can just pull it out.
Well, Sansa's, you know, she's good with her needle. Arya's good with her needle.
It looks like a
She's been
beaten
making
up.
Stark logos and on leather that look amazing for Jon. So it did look pretty beat up. She definitely didn't just make that thing.
I liked when Tyrion said to the slave masters, "Thank you for the armada. Our queen does love ships."
Yes, that was great the way he said that.
Can we get a?
Or how about,
do we get some love for Rickon? We hardly knew you.
Yeah. He didn't.
Yeah, he hadn't spoken since season 3.
And now he just kind of whimpered. He didn't really say
Yeah, he
anything.
And
in
no
this
one, I don't know,
episode.
no one, I don't
Yeah,
know.
he
that
didn't say anything.
Stark fans, they were like, "Oh, that's sad," but it's like, okay, anyway, onward.
Yep.
Yeah, it was when he had that arrow shot through him, and you could hear him kind of wheezing. I felt pretty bad for the kid.
Oh, it was really, really brutal. Because Ramsay lets off that shot, and you see it miss him, and he's just about to grab him, but you don't see Ramsay shoot again, and then he gets hit. So it was kind of like a
Yeah.
little trick they played on us
And I
there.
think Ramsay was missing on purpose just to draw Jon out.
Yeah.
further.
Definitely.
I think it's crazy and actually awesome that this is the first scene that Jon and Ramsay have been together in this 6-year-old series. I
Oh,
love that.
yeah. The bastards finally meet. The two most famous bastards in Westeros currently.
I liked when Jon said, "I won't let him touch you again. I'll protect you, I promise." And Sansa said, "No one
Yes.
can protect me."
Yeah.
I was just about to say that. And you think that's a subtle Arya reference? Arya,
I
who's heading
don't
home to
know.
Winterfell?
I thought, I don't know if that was on purpose. It felt more to me just like the shit I've been through. You can't take anything for granted. on this show.
Yeah,
but it could be.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it was a double entendre by the writers at least. Obviously Sansa wouldn't know that. So from her motivational standpoint, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, I don't know. There is another Trueborn Stark, by the way. It's Bran. So maybe Bran will end up the Lord of Winterfell and Warden of the North.
Maybe we'll find out next week.
Maybe so.
Maybe he's already been Lord of Winterfell.
He's been warging into Ramsay.
No, maybe thousands of years ago.
I see what you're saying.
When they have the meeting right before the battle, and then they show Lyanna Mormont in the background, and she's got this scowl on her face.
I love her.
It's just so funny.
Perpetual scowl.
Yeah.
Let's see. So people were talking about this Umber conspiracy. I think we can safely say that's not true.
Yeah,
He
sadly.
fought with Ramsay. He got his face bitten off by Tormund, right? Or he bit him somewhere.
Yeah, Tormund bit his jugular out.
And
It's a little Rick Grimes style right there.
exactly.
Totally.
And when I guess it was Ramsay threw the head of Shaggy Dog down, Jon and Sansa seemed to recognize it. So I think that was pretty straightforward.
Yeah, sadly.
When Dany was flying the dragon and she said, Dracarys, I looked that up. It's High Valyrian for dragon fire.
Yep.
So that's how she gets him to breathe fire.
Draka from the, Latin Draco for dragon.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently Valyrian is a Latin-based language, a romantic language.
When Ramsay he was screaming, knock, draw, loose to his bowman. Knock is, in case anybody's curious, that's when you fit the arrow groove into the bowstring. Then that's N-O-C-K. Then draw is when you pull it back. Loose is let it go.
And that was a nice throwback to the battle at Castle Black when Alistair Thorne was saying that over and over, and then passed the wall to Jon when he went down to fight, and Jon was giving the commands, knock, draw, loose. But it just reminded me of that.
And then you mentioned that, Jon said, will your men want to fight for you when you hear you wouldn't fight for them, was similar to Grey Worm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then there was a couple other echoes. I read this in an article, actually. Tormund bit Umber just like Brienne bit the Hound.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah, she bit him in the ear. It was very similar. And they're, Brienne and Tormund have that little
they have something in common
thing
there
going on.
they could talk about on the first date.
Yeah.
And then the camera panning up with all the fighters squished together around Jon when they were being compacted, and he clawed his way out. The camera panned up. He's looking up at it. It's similar to the shot after Daenerys conquered Yunkai and all the former slaves gathered around her.
Yep.
So,
And it's just in a vortex.
yeah. It's like
Lifting
these
her up, crowd surfing.
people called the leadership.
It's crazy how she controls the air, the land, and the sea now, right?
Yeah, it's totally
Oh,
crazy.
yeah. That's awesome. And then the final thing I had a little note on, Littlefinger had proposed to Cersei that a while back that he tried to take back Winterfell and become Warden of the North. That doesn't look like that happened. So he's going to want something from this, right? Is it just that he wants to be Sansa's boyfriend or what?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible. He's definitely has some type of motive.
Yeah. Maybe he wants to move in with her. Maybe he does still want to be the Warden of the North.
He may be, he may want to be the Warden of the North / Sansa's husband.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting though, because it could go either way. We learned in prior seasons that Peter Baelish had originally been in love with Kat, and he let his emotion get the better of him, his emotions, and he challenged Brandon Stark, who was Kat's betrothed, to a duel for her heart, essentially. And Brandon Stark cut him from navel to neck, essentially, like a disfiguring blow that nearly killed him. So he has let his emotions get in the way of his logic before in terms of pursuing his object of desire. So it's hard to say. Did he learn his lesson? It seems like he learned his lesson for a long time. But is he thinking logically here, or is he being driven by emotion? Yeah,
but he's just that type of character that I don't know that anyone ever knows like what his final game plan is, because he seems to be so many moves ahead of almost everyone else on the show.
I miss him too. He
Yeah.
hasn't been in it enough this season.
Yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite characters. You know, how do you feel about people who go Hadouken?
Isn't that from Street Fighter?
No, I don't even know, but it's from the Game of Thrones bad lip reading.
Oh, that's Street Fighter.
They have Baelish say it.
Duncan.
That's hilarious.
Got it. Anything else you guys wanted to say about this episode before we close out this segment?
Yeah, we forgot to cover something pretty massive, man.
What?
Massive. The death of 1-1.
Yeah, it was sad.
We touched on it.
And
We touched on it. I mean, I think if you have one giant in a battle, he's going to be the target, you know? So
Yeah.
it's pretty
absolutely.
sad. Yeah.
He had his moments.
He definitely
Yeah.
did. Yeah.
I feel like we need to recognize how badass he was
Yeah.
in death, though. He busted through that door. He breached the impenetrable gates of Winterfell, which is known to, you know, it is known that 500 men can defend Winterfell from thousands of invaders. But one giant is enough, if the circumstances are right, to breach that wall and gain entry for the invaders. In this case, the true owners. But he ran in there, dropped to his knees.
It was
had
almost
all these
comical too,
arrows.
because Ramsay's like, "Oh, we're in Winterfell. We can stay here for a long time." Boom, boom.
Boom, just like at Castle Black when he smashed in the gate up there. And he just had all these arrows sticking out of him, pin cushioning him, and he just let out this roar as all the other soldiers came running in. That was just fearsome to behold. And
It's
went out like
interesting
a
that
motherfucking champion.
Ramsay shot him in the eye when, technically speaking, he could have shot that arrow at Jon Snow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know.
I was thinking that too.
yeah. It's those stormtroopers and R2D2 kind of thing. Was it 1-1 that broke the door? Didn't the giant that broke the door at Castle Black bust through and then die?
Oh yeah, the gate from the north. I was talking about this season when Jon was dead,
right,
and
yes.
Alistair Thorne was staging his coup.
Yeah.
1-1 smashed through
That's
and
right.
led the wildlings in to save the day.
Do you know if he's the last giant?
I think so.
It seems to be sort of implied on the show that he might be. But yeah,
Was there
I'm not
stuff from
gonna
the
comment
book?
on the
You
books.
can mention that in the book stock section if you want.
yeah,
'Cause I'm curious about
Is
it.
there a son of 1-1?
2-2.
1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Anything else, Harry?
Good.
Awesome. All right, that was great. Let's take a little break, but there is more to come. Stay with us.
Gigantic, gigantic, a big, big love. Gigantic, 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 a big, big love. A big, big love. A big, big love. A big, big love. A big, big love.
All right, we're back. It's time for the news. For one thing, as an article on CNET put it, quote, "The fury of Dragonfire and the vengeance of dueling illegitimate noblemen are nothing next to the ire of Game of Thrones fans denied their weekly fix." And I was one of those, because when I went to watch it on HBO Now, as I do every week, it was down. It wasn't working.
No way.
Yeah, and I was like, what the fuck? I tried to restart everything, and then I went online and saw 1,000 angry Twitterers.
Oh, that's funny.
So it was down from 9 p.m. Eastern till like an hour and 20 minutes
Oh, people
after
must
that.
have been
Oh,
losing their
man.
minds.
Yeah. So anyway, it finally came back on and everything was fine.
Thanks, science.
I think it was just, everybody knew what this episode was going to be, so they all tried to watch it at the same time. Millions of
definitely.
people. Next, Sophie Turner, who plays Sansa. Entertainment Weekly asked what she thought of this episode. She says, "It was amazing. I really loved the idea of the Battle of the Bastards, and I was loving the idea of Jon killing Ramsay. But then I was like, no, Sansa needs her first kill, and it has to be Ramsay. No one else but her." And when he basically says, "He's yours," I'm like, yes. She leaves him for dead, walks away, and doesn't even watch him die, which she did watch him die. I think maybe they told her, or they filmed it differently. I don't know, but she said, "It's such a great scene, so well written, and it's so great to be able to have my first kill."
She's insane.
Then they talked to Iwan Rion, who plays Ramsey. When did showrunners David Benioff and Dan Weiss give you the call to reveal Ramsey's demise? He says, I had received half the scripts, 5 episodes. Then I got the call. They joked, isn't it great Ramsey ends up on the Iron Throne? As soon as they said that, I said, he's dead, isn't he? It's cool. I've had 4 lovely seasons here. It's been great to be involved with such an amazing show. I think it's kind of right that he goes down, because what else is he going to do after this? He's done so many things. He's reached his peak.
That's safe to say.
Yeah. They say it's arguably unfair for Ramsey because he won strategically on the battlefield. Given the information he had, he beat Jon Snow. He should be the victor, even though he's not the one the audience is rooting for. That's what Entertainment Weekly said. He replies, but I do think it's just and it's right. I'm glad it happens as a fan of the show. Jon Snow needs to win because otherwise there's no hope left in the world. But it's interesting that it isn't fair, and afterward Ramsey still thinks he's won. He's so arrogant and self-assured he thinks he'll still be fine until the last minute. He always thinks he's going to be okay.
He's no longer still smug.
Nope, he's now dog shit.
Oh.
They say that your character was being matched against Jon in the first place had to be exciting. He says, anyone who asks me, who would you like Ramsey to meet? My answer has always been Jon Snow. He's the antithesis of Ramsey. They're almost a yin and a yang. They both come from such a similar place, yet they're so different. And even though they're enemies, they've both risen so far as bastards, which is almost incomprehensible. And now they're both here facing each other. They couldn't be any more different, yet more similar. And then finally they say, you said in an interview last year that if Ramsey is going to die, you want him to go out in some big dramatic way. And this is certainly that. He says, yeah, I feel really lucky he got a proper send-off, and it's a gruesome death. It's so ironic he's been banging on about those hounds all this time.
That's great. He seems like a pretty cool guy.
Yeah, I'd like to meet him.
Definitely.
All right, so this is the final item, but it's a long one. It's that interview with the director. I just thought it would be interesting to hear him talk about the battle. You know, we heard a little bit before that I read, but there's a little bit more. So they say, we've seen field battles in so many films. Were there any particular elements that you were trying to emulate, or for that matter, trying to avoid compared to what we've seen on the big screen before? And Miguel Sapochnik says, I watched every pitch field battle I could find, footage of real ones too, looking for patterns for what works, what doesn't. Where did he find footage of real field battles? Anyway,
World War II or World War I trench fighting, maybe?
Footage?
Yeah, I think I've seen footage.
Oh, wow.
Civil War reenactments.
For what works, what doesn't, what takes you out of the moment, what keeps you locked in. The big reference was Akira Kurosawa's Ran, R-A-N. Interestingly, one of the things I noticed is that staging of these battles through the years has changed dramatically. Back in the day, you'd see these huge aerial shots of horse charges, and there were 2 big differences. First, it was all real, no CGI, and second, often when the horses would go down, you can kind of tell they got really hurt. Nowadays, you'd never get away with that, nor would you want to.
Yeah.
Also, the more I watched these scenes, the more I felt like these aerial shots are now so synonymous with a final charge. They kind of take you out of the moment. That is to say, you experience this moment as an objective observer in all its glory with no sense of danger from the inevitable impact of hundreds of these huge stampeding animals. I was interested in what it must feel like to be on the ground when that shit happens. Absolute terror, a moment of clarity, what goes through your head when you are right back in the thick of it. After Hardhome, there was a lot of happy campers in the Game of Thrones offices, but there was also a sense that we somehow had to make Battle of the Bastards bigger and better. I personally felt the pressure in that respect, and so I tried to quash it as quickly as possible by using my mantra in this response. Quote, let's just make it the best we can. That doesn't mean making it better or avoiding how others have done it, because let's face it, battles have been done in every which way. It just means understanding the story and trying to service it the best way you can for the money and time you have. Most of all, it means choosing a point of view. So yeah, a lot of the things I was talking about earlier. I
think he did a phenomenal job. Oh, I'm also wondering, did he say when that shit happens, the way it's on the ground, when way you'd feel on the ground seeing all that shit happen? Did he say that? Okay.
Yeah. They blocked out the eye, but I can tell what it's supposed to say.
I think it's safe to say it was probably shit.
Showrunners David Benioff and Dan Weiss have said the team looked to real-life historical battles for staging this. What specific... No, I don't care about that. Hold on. I'll go to the next one.
Well, the phalanx
say-
was inspired by, I think, Hannibal.
Okay, well, I'll read it. He says, very much so. Initially, we based Battle of the Bastards on the Battle of Agincourt, which took place between the French and English in 1415. But as needs changed, as did budgets, it became more like the Battle of Cannae between the Romans and Hannibal in 216 BC.
Wow. Good call, Harry.
Yeah, good call. He also did research into Alexander the Great, who was legendary in his strategic battle prowess. That said, at some point you need to put all the research down and tell a good story. The Bolton shield wall, for example, was a production-friendly way to emulate a, quote, double envelopment pincher move without using horses as originally scripted, and also as a way to avoid seeing horizons on the field and therefore having to dress fewer dead bodies or stage background fights so deep because we didn't have the money.
It's hilarious, too, because double envelopment was exactly what John said when he was trying to say what they didn't want to happen.
Right.
And Tormund was like...
And what enabled it was the creation of that wall of bodies to pin them.
Oh yeah,
and interestingly, let's say the Alliance forces had their bows risen and drawn, and Davos said, "No, let's not. We're just going to be killing our own guys." And the second after he said that, Ramsay was like, "Loose." So he was intentionally killing his own guys here to create that
to
wall,
make this barrier.
Yeah,
man, he inspires a lot of loyalty for an asshole. He said, I also really like the visual of a wall of Bolton red and white crosses on the shields. It felt very fascistic and graphic.
Yes, very fascist.
Totally. They ask, my understanding is that adding horses makes everything harder. What was the toughest part of that? He says the time factor. Everything takes about 50% longer. Also, they need relatively solid ground to run on, and when it rains, the field would turn into a bog and we'd have to lay down tons of gravel to shore up their footing. Horses also get bored and spooked, and some perform better than others. They also need an entire separate field to rest in. Oh, and they shit and piss all the time. In fact, one of the hardest scenes to shoot was the parley between the different factions prior to the actual battle. Getting a bunch of horses to just stand there all day and do nothing is much harder than getting them to run around. They would fart and pee a lot, often in the middle of Kit Harington's lines. Reminds me of Nico a little bit. It's hard to get him to stay still.
They sound like divas.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
Come on, you guys are getting paid good money. On how long it took to shoot, he says, we ended up with 25 days, including the parley on the battlefield prior to the actual battle and all the scenes in Winterfell in the aftermath. Reaching that number was the biggest challenge, finding a way to cram in and organize everything so that we would use every single minute well in order to squeeze every ounce we could out of our time was the most logistically complicated thing I've ever been involved in. When all was said and done, we had around 500 extras, 160 tons of gravel, 70 horses and riders, 65 stuntmen and women, 7 principal actors, often 4 camera crews, 25 days to shoot it, and a call sheet with often up to 600 crew members.
Wow.
Amazing.
So that's it about the battle. Then they ask him a bit about... oh, wait, no, that's not it. They ask, when Ramsay played his hunting game with Rickon, was Jon Snow his true target there? He says, absolutely. In the scenes leading up to the battle, Sansa warns Jon not to fall for Ramsay's tricks, which is exactly what he does. Rickon's death is all just a ploy to bait Jon, and it's incredibly successful.
Oh.
And then, without talking specifics, obviously, what in general excites you about next week's supersized finale? He says that it feels equally as epic as episode 9, but for completely different reasons. That's cool, because he directs that one too.
Oh, wow.
What?
Yeah, this season, I don't know if it's been like that every season, but each director gets 2 episodes in a row.
Huh.
So must be logistics.
But
or
talk
something.
about getting the last 2.
Oh,
It's crazy.
Yeah,
totally crazy. They must have ultra confidence in him.
he
After
delivered.
Hard Home, I mean, yeah.
He did just do them all.
Yeah.
And then a little bit about Sansa and Ramsay. So Sansa and Ramsay's final scene together capped the show's most controversial storyline. What were your goals with that? When Ramsay had his hounds attack Lady Walda, the choice was made not to show anything really. What options were weighed for how much to show here? He says, I must admit I kind of wanted to make people start to feel for Ramsay in that wonderful way Thrones turns these things on their head. But the showrunners were clear. They didn't want anyone to sympathize with Ramsay Bolton, and this time they wanted blood.
Yeah, and it's like nobody wanted to see Walda and the baby getting eaten, but everybody wanted to see Ramsay getting eaten.
Yeah.
You know, so
And they didn't even show that whole thing, but they showed some of it. He says, in a way, I agree. This is not a time to be morally ambiguous. Ramsay needs to die, and horribly. This is what the audience has been waiting to see. That said, there's no need to dwell on the actual carnage. What's left to our imagination is always way worse. The most effective moment for me was the sound of a squealing pig you hear from Ramsay in the background as Sansa walks away.
Oh.
Apparently, it's actually what happens when you rip someone's windpipe open while they're still alive and gasping for air.
Oh, wow.
yeah, I mean,
Good
without
call there.
vocal cords to shape the sound.
Oh, I hear some ravens. That means it's time for ravens calls.
Wait, was that Ravens or was that Melissa?
Our friend Melissa did an amazing raven sound a couple of weeks ago. I think she has a pet raven.
Amazing. Yeah, she must.
All right, let's go through these. Who wants to go first?
I think Harry does.
I'll kick it
Okay.
off. Lloyd Green. That may have been the single most satisfying episode of TV ever.
Olivia Deck says, wow, just wow. I'm so hyped the Starks have reclaimed their home. Seeing the Flayed Man banner fall and the Direwolf banner put in its place made me cheer. Things are starting to look up for the Starks. Tormund went full-on Rick Grimes on Small John Umber with that neck bite.
Nikki Campbell Keith says it was obviously an epic episode, dragons, battles, and whatnot. But what I absolutely loved was the cinematography.
Yes.
This episode was shot so beautifully. The framing, the slow-mo. Oh my goodness, so awesome.
Totally. Ashley Snellgrove. Wow. The battle was one of the most intense scenes I've ever witnessed. I felt like I was suffocating alongside John. My heart is still racing. Lots of things to process, but glad to see that Ramsay is done for good.
Yeah. Well, technically, we didn't see him die. Just saying.
I'm sure he's fine.
Laura South says, me too. Even 15 minutes later, I'm still shaking.
William Steiner. I wonder how Karen felt about this episode.
Yeah.
William Steiner says, when I saw the banners of House Aaron, I stood up and cheered. When I saw the Stark banner unfurl, I almost cried.
Yeah, I may have cried a little. Just saying.
Veronica Linares. I'm glad John and Tormund made it out of there. I'd be sad if my favorite Ginger died.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Who died? Rickon and the Giant
1-1.
and Ramsay. I think that's about it, right? And 1,000 other people that we don't know.
1,000 red shirts from both sides.
Umber.
Yeah. Laura Willie Swink says, amazingly epic! Kicked off with a total fuck yeah moment. Then into the totally unexpected scene of Danny and crew meet the Ironborn. In parentheses, I am 100% shipping Team Danyara to one of the most brutal and horrific war scenes I've ever experienced, TV, big screen, or otherwise. My big question is, why did Sansa keep the Knights of the Vale secret from Jon? Was she unsure that Baelish would be reliable and didn't want to give him false hope? Or did she know they were on their way, but wanted Jon's army to fight to the death like they had nothing to lose? When she and Littlefinger show up on horseback, she had a little bit of a devilish twinkle in her eye. Yeah, she could have been letting Jon, sacrifice himself to get him out of the way if she deemed him a threat. It could have been to make Ramsay think they were throwing it all on the line to draw him out and make him vulnerable, which is what ended up being what happened.
Yeah. And what she's saying here, suggesting, trying to be an optimist, is to make them fight to the death like they had nothing to lose.
Maybe she just has slow ravens.
I think, I would be disappointed if this got dropped and was never addressed by Jon Snow, but I think it's going to be addressed.
Yeah, I think so. I
Agreed.
think he'd be pretty mad about it. Yeah. So expect to learn more about that.
But I don't know. I really don't know, and I want to know. I think she has good intentions, and that I think maybe she thought for some reason that Jon Snow wouldn't have accepted that help, but I don't know why.
Yeah, because Littlefinger has this reputation of being a devious bastard, so
Well,
I'm sure Jon
she is
Snow...
new to war and battlefield strategies and timing and all that, so she could play that up.
True.
I don't know. Rima Joe says, wow, what a fantastic episode. Glad Sansa was there to make sure Ramsay got his due, that little fucker.
Olivia Gray says, I absolutely love that Sansa, the character no one expected anything of, has become a total badass. Seeing her ride in at the last second with those Vale soldiers and Littlefinger made me scream out loud. And the shadow of a smile she has as she's walking away from Ramsay being torn apart by his dogs was the best ending shot of the entire show. Sansa has been a naive, simpering idiot who was made a victim by men time and time again, and to see her taking control of her destiny and honoring her heritage as a Stark makes up for every quibble I've ever had about this show.
I agree.
Good move, showrunners.
Yeah, I think a lot of people felt a big connection with Sansa in this episode.
Mm-hmm. I did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I did too.
I was on her side for sure.
Yeah. Kate Lur says, holy shit! Epic, incredible, and so very, very satisfying. Best episode of the series.
And Miller G says, meh. No, I'm just kidding. Says, the battle was great, but Dany and Yara make love, not war.
Hey, I can get behind that.
Laura South is bringing us back down to earth here. I do have one small complaint about the episode, though. The troops from the Vale arriving just at the last minute, it was so Deus Ex Machina. I know that's how stories stay exciting, but it was predictable. John would have lost everything if they hadn't showed up right when they did. 15 minutes later would have been way too late.
Yeah.
It's TV.
Yep.
That's what I say. But yeah, I know what you mean.
I would give this episode
Very
9.9 brains, I'll say. Just for that 1.1 of a percentage would have been seeing Wan get a little more action.
Yeah. I think I was wondering that myself too, and I just think that for one thing, if he would have been really quick and just went around stomping people and throwing and twisting a lot of people in half, it just would have seemed like a one-sided battle that was over quickly.
Yep.
Yeah,
definitely true. Or he could have just smashed right through that shield wall.
Shouldn't he have a club that's like his size, like a Bam Bam club or something
like a big tree?
Yeah, they probably have a telephone pole around somewhere. Just
He could have
Winterfell can go without phones for a day or two.
dozens of men with one of those.
Okay, Duncan, your turn, I think. Right?
Yeah. Sarah Larkham says, I wonder what Sansa's deal with Baelish will cost her. I bet it's not good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Deal with the devil.
Mm-hmm.
Kathy Bridges says, I think they're even. He's the one who hooked her up with that shithead. He won't see it that way.
Oh, here we go. Derek Pacheco. I can't shake the feeling that Sansa is pregnant. Ramsay saying, I'm part of you now had a nasty feeling to it, more than the context of him raping her. That would be devastating, but so very Game of Thrones.
Kay Deer says, I don't think she's pregnant. Sansa's remark to Jon about still feeling what he did inside her could have meant a number of things, especially combined with what she said about how he never touched her face. I'm guessing he may have branded her in a way. He could have branded/burned something onto her body or mutilated her in some other form. If she has permanent physical damage to her body because of him, then that could easily explain his statement about always being a part of her. He could have said the same thing to Theon Reek, or maybe he did. We know that Theon will never be able to forget Ramsay, and Ramsay will forever be a part of him because of how badly Ramsay traumatized and mutilated him. We know Theon isn't pregnant.
Winky face.
I didn't see the ultrasound.
Yeah, I think she could be pregnant, but it would seem very soap opera-ish to me.
Yeah, I think it would fit though. Just like the horrible, like tragic nature of the show.
True. That's true.
And
parentage and lineage and all that play a big part in the show.
Yeah, and it's just like such an awful thought.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's horrible to have a little baby, the sins of the father be cast upon a baby like that, but it's just something so beautiful being seen as so horrible, but it's just an awful idea.
I know. I mean, I have thoughts about that, but I think I'm going to wait to see what happens before I get into it too much.
Sure.
Maybe I won't have to talk about it. All right. So Megan Kleinman says, "Bye, Felicia. Glad your mutts finally got a meal."
Yeah. Bye, Felicia.
And we got some email.
From Rocks in Manchester, the north of England. Was it me, or did it seem that John had the protection of someone or something, be it Rohaller, I hope I'm pronouncing that right,
That's a R'hllor.
R'hllor, TWP prophecy, or some other magic or reason we don't yet understand? Some people seem to be complaining online that John should have died and only lived because he is a fan favorite. But it felt to me that it was because John is not meant to die today. Showers of arrows, it's a tongue twister, seemed to miss him by inches. The water dance of fighting Bolton enemies on all sides played out so fluidly. Then in the huge crush of corpses, friends and foe, it seemed like for a moment he was about to accept death. Yet something made him fight. He chose life in that moment, and it seemed like a big chance since his return from the darkness beyond that we believe to be death. Also, did you guys pick up on Sansa's comment that no one can protect you to John? If Arya is no one, then is she to have a future part to play in John's destiny? That's a good call there.
You'd think so.
This episode was phenomenal, an outstanding achievement of acting, cinematography, and just overall fucking epicness. Love you guys. Can't wait for your podcast this week.
Yay.
Awesome.
Just to clarify also, the TPTWP prophecy is the Prince That Was Promised prophecy. Next, we have an email from Jess from Toronto. Jess says, "There was a moment last night during the battle where horses were slamming into one another and arrows were falling and bodies were piling. And I turned to my husband and said, 'Dear God, I don't think I've ever seen a movie or TV show that has so clearly illustrated the actual terrifying chaos of this kind of battle.' After the episode ended and Inside the Episode started, and Benioff and Weiss were talking about the scene, one of them said something to the effect of, 'We realized that no movies or shows had ever really shown what this kind of battle really would have been like. So that's what we wanted to do.' May I just say, mission accomplished?" This scene did, for my understanding of medieval battles, what Saving Private Ryan did for my understanding of D-Day in Normandy, namely showing that it was fucking terrifying and random chaotic chance dictating whether you lived or died. Hands down, fantastic. I love this scene more than I loved Hard Home, and that is saying something. I agree, Jess. During that battle, Saving Private Ryan was on my mind for the equivalent in terms of modern warfare, or, mid-century modern warfare.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The whole storming the beach at Normandy.
Yeah.
From Ophelia Contreras says, "Wow, this is a great episode. I loved all the little details, like when the army from the Eyrie arrived and everyone turned to look at them except Tormund, who used it to his advantage." I also saw someone point out that in season 1, episode 1, there's a brief scene where Rickon grabs some arrows and runs to John to hand them to him when helping clean up. That's either a huge coincidence or great foreshadowing.
Oh.
Maybe so.
Ugh.
Okay, this is Greg from Virginia.
Hey there, Jason. This is Greg from Virginia. So about the episode last night, I'm a bit of two minds. So I really did enjoy the kind of recreation of Daenerys and her. We're not talking about what I'm going to surrender, and basically her kind of redomination of and focus of her forces and will. But then the Battle of the Bastards, honestly, it's not that I was underwhelmed. It was that I was just frustrated because you sat there and you just watched John do exactly what Sansa told him not to do. And it was so frustrating. I wasn't saddened. I was just like, so disappointed in that character. And then you have no one actually knows that it's happening, but we got the army from the gods to come in. Sansa finds Littlefinger and shows up, and just, I was a little disappointed. I mean, I guess this is the size of episode 9. Maybe I just wasn't feeling well last night, but man, I was just disappointed. Maybe just because of John's character. I don't know. Anyway, you guys enjoy the show, and look forward to hearing the podcast. Bye.
That sucks.
I understand that.
Yeah, me too.
But I think he's a lot like his dad, who was naive and ended up getting his head cut off because of it. And luckily, some of his sister grew up, and she's smarter than him in some ways, and she was there to bail him out. But in my, even back when Ned Stark died, there was a part of me that's like, he kept his honor. He didn't have to get down in the mud with everybody. And in this world, that means you die. But I don't know what I'm trying to say. But I think that was definitely supposed to be a part of this episode, that John was just so naive and kind of guileless, and that was definitely put him at a huge disadvantage.
It seems to be a trait with male Starks. Rickard Stark and Brandon Stark were both killed when they basically rode into King's Landing to attempt to save Lyanna, and essentially handed themselves right over to the Mad King, and they were executed in spectacular fashion as well. So it's sad to see him go down that path as well and almost face a similar fate. So it's very frustrating. I can see that point of view.
I enjoy it. I think it's cool that not everybody is, a
strategic genius and can overcome their emotions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because the question arises, like, did the best man win? And he just stumbled his way to
right. Just want to mention I'm drinking a beer called Blackbeard. It's BLACKBEERD that was sent to me by Greg, who we just heard from. Thank you, Greg.
Interesting.
Bunch of beers, different kinds of beers.
There's a great brewery in Connecticut, also called Beard Brewery, BEER apostrophe D as well. I wonder if there's any connection. Doubt it. But Hello, wolves and dragons, krakens, bears, and flayed men. Welcome back to another Still Smug Book Talk section. I'm your host, Sir Duncan the Fearsome, and today I'll be covering Season 6, Episode 9, The Battle of the Bastards. There actually wasn't really any direct book crossover material from The Battle of the Bastards tonight, so instead I'll talk a bit about certain aspects that are similar and speculate a bit about how the show events may foreshadow book events that have yet to come. As usual, this will be a spoilery segment, so if you haven't read the books and don't want to be spoiled on things that happen in the books that don't happen in the show, or might happen in the books and then do happen in the show, or might happen in the show and did happen in the books, or may happen in the books, etc., then skip this segment. So one of the first similarities we have this week in The Battle of the Bastards is Yara seemingly taking the role of Victarion from the books. As you guys all know, Victarion is sent east to find Dany at the behest of Euron Greyjoy, and he's supposed to basically collect Dany and bring her back to be Euron's wife. On the show, it seems like Yara is sort of fulfilling this role instead of Victarion, like the two roles have been condensed. And instead of being sent by Euron, she's sort of fleeing to Daenerys as an option, but Victarion in the book, wants to take Daenerys as a wife himself to sort of show up Euron, since Euron had basically befouled or besmirched his previous wife, and which that led to Victarion murdering his own wife with his bare hands. In this case, it seems like Yara wants to best Euron by winning Dany to her cause. Not by marrying Dany, but, she's open for it. She's up for anything if it comes down to that, so that's pretty cool. That brings us to the next point, which is Daenerys and lesbianism. Get a little hint here in this episode that she's not entirely adverse to the idea of lesbian relations with Yara, Theon's sister, and this is a concept that's not unfamiliar to book readers. When she was lacking Drogo, her husband, her son in stars, on the trip to Meereen various times along the way, she got pretty close with her handmaiden Irri, with whom she engaged in sexual relations, let's say. I think on a boat while they're heading to the slaver cities. I think Irri was one of the Dothraki handmaidens that Daenerys got when she was married to Khal Drogo. And in the books, Dany doesn't really seem into it, but she kind of craves that intimate connection with somebody, and Irri is just kind of there to do it. She reflects later that Irri's kisses tasted of duty. And that brings me to my first book reading for today, which is an excerpt of Dany and Irri getting it on. Lying abed in her narrow bunk, she found herself wondering how it would be to have a man squeezed in beside her in place of her handmaid. And the thought was more exciting than it should have been. Sometimes she would close her eyes and dream of him, but it was never Jorah Mormont she dreamed of. Her lover was always younger and more comely, though his face remained a shifting shadow. Once, so tormented she could not sleep, Dany slid a hand down between her legs and gasped when she felt how wet she was. Scarce daring to breathe, she moved her fingers back and forth between her lower lips, slowly so as not to wake Irri beside her, until she found one sweet spot and lingered there, touching herself lightly, timidly at first, and then faster. Still, the relief she wanted seemed to recede before her, until her dragon stirred and one screamed out across the cabin, and Irri woke and saw what she was doing. Dany knew her face was flushed, but in the darkness Irri surely could not tell. Wordless, the handmaid put a hand on her breast, then bent to take a nipple in her mouth. Her other hand drifted down across the soft curve of her belly, through the mound of fine silvery gold hair, and went to work between Dany's thighs. It was no more than a few moments until her legs twisted and her breasts heaved and her whole body shuddered. She screamed then. Or perhaps that was Drogon. Irri never said a thing, only curled back up and went back to sleep the instant the thing was done. And there you have it, Dany's first lesbian sexual experience with her handmaiden Irri. And Dany's lesbian adventures are not the only lesbian adventures in the Song of Ice and Fire book series. As you know, Cersei experiments with Taena Merryweather at a couple points throughout the books. And while we were on the Dany and Meereen topics, I figured it would be worthwhile to mention that Drogon has become very, very large. Massive, you could say. And for me, this made me think of Balerion the Black Dread, the famed dragon of Aegon the Conqueror, the first Targaryen king of Westeros, from about 300 years prior to the start of Game of Thrones. So Balerion, the Black Dread, was his massive, massive black dragon that he rode during the conquest. It's famous for having scorched the towers of Harrenhal, as well as, forming the Iron Throne by melting the metallic swords of all the enemies of Aegon. Interestingly, the Black Dread was the largest of the Targaryen dragons and lived for close to 2 centuries. Now, of course, the history and lore of Westeros is present in the Game of Thrones TV show, but for book readers, I think a lot more of the details are sort of hammered into your heads repeatedly throughout the story. And for me, when I saw Drogon, Viserion, and Rhaegal all flying together in formation, it caused images of the original conquest of the Seven Kingdoms to rise up inside my mind. I could almost see Aegon, Visenya, and Rhaenys riding their 3 dragons, Balerion the Black Dread, Vhagar, and Meraxes. So, moving on to the Winterfell stuff, a lot of you probably have heard of the Grand Northern Conspiracy. If not, I would check it out. It's basically the theory that surrounds the event of Robb Stark legitimizing Jon Snow before Robb was killed. He did this in front of a number of witnesses, including Catelyn Stark and the Blackfish. And the Grand Northern Conspiracy basically is the all-encompassing theory of how these houses in the north may be conspiring in secret to raise Jon Stark up as their new king in the north. There hasn't really been any evidence that this conspiracy has occurred on the show, and in fact it was kind of called into question when Small John Umber showed up at Winterfell to hand over Rickon to Ramsay. So, unfortunately, it seems this week that the notion of the Grand Northern Conspiracy, at least on the show, has been dispelled. It seemed to be dispelled already when Lyanna Mormont had told Jon that they only know one king, the king in the north, whose name is Stark, and if the conspiracy had existed and they were really aiming to raise Jon Stark up as king, she probably would have mentioned it to him at that point. Oh, by the way, we know you're actually a Stark now, and you are the king, so, yep, we pledge fealty. But wasn't that clear, and now that Small John Umber and his forces have decisively chosen to back Ramsay Bolton in this conflict, it seems apparent that the Grand Northern Conspiracy, at least in the form of the books, is not a thing, and not an actual conspiracy on the show itself. Kind of unfortunate, but it would have been a lot to cover in the short amount of time remaining, and it makes sense for it to be kind of cut out. A little bit too complex for the TV show, I think. This episode may also mark a particularly sad occasion for the TV show, which may not be the same in the books, but it seems like it may be the death of the last living giant in Westeros. Now, for all we know, there could be more beyond the wall, or some that ran away when Stannis attacked, or something, ones that escaped that didn't necessarily try to join up with the Night's Watch and cross through to the south of the wall. But as far as we know, 1-1 seemed to be the last remaining giant. And with the extinction of any race, it's, a very sad occasion, but there's something special about the giants, and it seems like, if that's the last one, that something really, really awesome and pure and magical has departed from the earth. And it reminds me of this scene when Jon is north of the wall on his mission to get in close with the wildlings. At one point, the wildlings are all singing a song that's called "The Last of the Giants," and it's about the death of the last giant. And at this point, the song is fictional, but it's poignant still because the giants are a dying race, and it's really sad. Ygritte is crying while they're singing it, and Jon is sort of like, I don't get it. And that's one of the times where she says her famous catchphrase, "You know nothing, Jon Snow," and gets all mad that he's being, not so sensitive about the giant issue. But here's my first quick reading, which are the lyrics from the song "The Last of the Giants," and this is going out to 1-1, our favorite giant friend. Oh, I am the last of the giants. My people are gone from the earth. The last of the great mountain giants who ruled all the world at my birth. Oh, the small folk have stolen my forests. They've stolen my rivers and hills, and they've built a great wall through my valleys and fished all the fish from my rills. In stone halls they burned their great fires. In stone halls they forged their sharp spears, whilst I walk alone in the mountains with no true companion but tears. They hunt me with dogs in the daylight. They hunt me with torches by night. For these men who are small can never stand tall, whilst giants still walk in the light. Oh, I am the last of the giants, so learn well the words of my song. For when I am gone, the singing will fade, and the silence shall last long and long. R.I.P. 1-1. We'll miss you, buddy. So things at this point in A Game of Thrones are very much situationally different from in A Song of Ice and Fire. We have characters in different places, storylines taking place in very different ways than they do in the books. Stannis is still potentially alive in the books, although in the Pink Letter, Ramsay, or someone pretending to be Ramsay, says that Stannis is dead. So how does all this affect what we can expect coming up from the books? From what I hear, it's been confirmed that Shireen will be burned in the books. So this sets up a future conflict between Davos and Melisandre, like we're seeing play out currently. I expect that to come to a head next week. We haven't gotten too much foreshadowing lately in the books regarding the wildfire in King's Landing. That hasn't been mentioned in a while, but it wouldn't surprise me if something similar to what's happening now in the story in Game of Thrones ended up playing out in the book series as well, I could easily see Cersei completing the Mad King's insane mission and trying to burn them all, which could result in a fracturing between Jaime and Cersei and potentially a twin murder. Maybe murder-suicide, who knows? But that'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, Sansa is in a totally different area, so I'm not sure how much we can predict based on her interactions with the Boltons and Jon Snow. They haven't been reunited on the show or anything yet, so we're kind of way out in left field on the in the show, and I can't really draw many conclusions based on the what's going to happen in the books because of this. Ramsay and Roose are both dead in the show, so that leads me to suspect that they will not be playing a major role in the end game of A Song of Ice and Fire. That's not surprising because they are too evil and ruthless to be of any use when the White Walkers come to take over Westeros. So those guys are kind of like, loose ends, bad characters that needed to be eliminated before the White Walkers came, because I can't see them uniting or being accepted by other, main characters in the books to fight together against the Whites. Just not something I see happening at all. I could see a battle playing out at Winterfell pretty similarly to this one. Sansa is with Peter Baelish at the Vale, and it wouldn't surprise me if she spearheads a movement to bring the Knights of the Vale to Jon's aid at Winterfell, especially considering that, the castle's been taken over by the Boltons, and they have a chance working together potentially to retake it. So I could see a Jon and Sansa collaboration in the books with Littlefinger with them as well if Jon ends up going down to the south to try to take back Winterfell, assuming he's resurrected, which I basically have taken for granted as inevitable. So, yeah, we will see what happens with that. One of the other cool things that happened this episode was seeing Viserion and Rhaegal blast their way out of the subterranean chamber where they're being held captive in chains. If you remember in the books, it's mentioned that they're breathing fire in that chamber so much that the stone itself is starting to melt and crack, and it seems inevitable that they're going to escape at some point to join Drogon in the wild. We can only hope that it is in a context where they are being controlled by Daenerys like on the show. Otherwise, it could mean big problems for Daenerys and big problems for anybody who decides to get in the way of these dragons. So, I'm hoping for some type of orderly resolution to that plot line that involves coordinated dragon fire towards targets that have it coming. I don't want to see any more little baby girls get burnt alive by these big mean dragons. That would not be cool. I can also see Dany taking Victarion's fleet and using it to sail west to Westeros, but I have a hard time imagining Dany working together with Victarion. It would take a lot of sacrifice of Victarion's motives and way of life in order for her to agree to work side by side with him, I think, which, who knows, maybe it'll happen. In this episode, Yara agreed to stop reaving, roving, raping, and pillaging, etc., so it's a possibility, I guess, for the books, although Victarion seems pretty set in his ways. And with his new powers, or whatever happened to him when he, spent a little time with our favorite Red Priest on the ship, who they plucked out of the water, who knows if he's even susceptible to having his mind changed, or what type of influence he may be able to have over Dany when he does finally meet her. Hopefully Tyrion will be there to help guide her in a positive direction in the books as well as the show, although that has not happened yet. But the prospect is very exciting. And I think that pretty much wraps up this week's episode of Still Smug, your book talk section. I'm your host, Sir Duncan the Fearsome, and I will look forward to talking to you all next week as well. I hope you enjoy next week's upcoming episode, the season finale of Game of Thrones. I'm sure it's going to be amazing. See you guys.
All right, now it's time for next week on Game of Thrones. For the benefit of Duncan, who doesn't want to hear any spoilers, we're only going to be talking about things that aren't spoilery at first and our predictions. And then I'll talk a little bit about the clip from next week, but you can tune out for that, Duncan. So next week is Season 6, Episode 10. It's written by David Benioff and D.B. Weiss and directed by Miguel Sapochnik, who directed this week's episode. It is the longest in the show's history with a runtime of 69 minutes.
Yay!
Okay, we have a call from Jason from Grand Prairie, Alberta, and I thought it would fit better in the next week's section because he has questions about that.
Hello, everyone. After last week, I can't be sure who's going to be hosting this week, but you're all welcome. All the hosts and co-hosts.
Thank you.
Jason calling from Grand Prairie, Alberta. I have a question about Episode 10. Traditionally, Episode 9 has been the big climactic episode, and then Episode 10 is for tying up loose ends. But judging from how neat and tidy they finished up the Jon Snow and Daenerys storylines last night, I'm wondering if you think we're even going to see them next week. Or if next week might be just a wrap-up episode for all the other storylines. If you agree, who do you think we're going to see next week? My guess is at least both Lannisters, Arya, and Bran. I'm hoping not to see Dorne, but I don't know what else Dorne is supposed to do this season. They were in the premiere episode. You'd think we'd see them at least once more, but who knows? And, maybe see where Lady Brienne goes. I don't know. Love to hear what you guys think. I'm super curious on what they're going to do next week. Thanks. Bye.
What do you guys think?
It's almost too many loose ends to tie up in one episode.
Mm-hmm.
They have to just tease each one out and set the stage and keep us anxiously waiting for however many months we have.
So what do you think? Are we going to find out the rest of Bran's vision at the Tower of Joy?
Oh, God, I hope so.
I know. I don't know, though. I feel like they're going to push that off.
I know. It wouldn't surprise me. It's the kind of thing that might be important at a given time, and when it would be like expedient for us to find out. But it'd be a great cliffhanger for the end of the season. Not so much a cliffhanger, but like a revelation for the end of the season. And part of the plot drive of the next season could be getting that information to Jon.
Also, Teresa Dover says, I'm curious to hear your theories about the final episode. Do you think we'll see Arya at Winterfell this season?
How far does she have to travel?
Pretty damn far. Real far.
The length of time required to get different places seems to vary depending on the needs of the story.
I think it's just that they show things in like out of sequence essentially. So I think all the times line up, but it just they need to show like the most important story beats, and it may be like at one part of the timeline for one person, and then like a couple months later or earlier for other characters. But they kind of mash them all together, and it just makes.
So you think
difficult.
it all would line up?
I do.
Picked it all.
Yeah.
And if you fly by dragon, apparently it's faster.
It's much faster. I think maybe the very last ending of it. That'd be pretty awesome.
Yeah.
The ending of the episode if she arrived. You think Dany will get on her ships for Westeros?
Oh,
I hope so.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I think she will.
Tyrion retold the story that we all know about Aerys Targaryen hiding wildfire all around King's Landing to Dany. I think maybe he brought that up. This is just speculation, but maybe he brought that up because it's going to be used next episode by Cersei.
We
who's
have
backed against a wall.
Yeah, we've had a lot of mentions of burning cities to ash and wildfire and references to the Mad King. We saw his infamous burn them all line on screen. And to have this mentioned an episode after Jaime says that Cersei would burn a city to ash. Cersei or Catelyn Stark would burn a city to ash for their children. I think there's some major foreshadowing of catastrophic damage happening in King's Landing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now I'm going to say the description of the episode and some things from the clip. So Duncan, why don't you just...
I'll take a long walk and a nice shit, you know.
Okay. Here's the super spoilery description for next week. In case you don't want to hear it, you should move to the next section. It says, Cersei faces her trial. That's it.
Yeah, they made a point of not saying anything about these last two.
Yeah, they're pretty tight-lipped. Although there was a 45-second clip that showed quite a lot.
Yeah.
It showed... You saw it?
Well, yeah, every single character that has an open arc is in there, and you're like,
pictured in there.
there's no way they can do any justice to all those storylines.
I know. Well, that's this whole show since day one. We'll inch forward here, inch forward there.
I just hope they don't do anything that's that doesn't move any plot. I don't know. Sometimes they have some scenes that you're like, why are we watching this?
This episode that we just saw did a great job of, it felt like moving things forward. Really fast. So next week, High Sparrow says, "Are you prepared to stand trial and profess your sins before the seven?" So that's Cersei. Mm-hmm. Jon Snow says to Sansa, "We need to trust each other. We have so many enemies now." It looks like they are addressing what happened with Littlefinger and stuff. I think that's why he's saying that. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting that he would use the choice of words on his part.
Mm-hmm. Then Sansa says to Littlefinger, "What do you want?" He says, "I thought you knew what I wanted."
And then obviously they could be playing all those clips out of order too, and just kind of throw us off even more.
Mess with us. Yeah. But that makes me think he wants to get some.
Yeah.
Or he wants to at least get married. Davos is talking to Melisandre with Jon Snow standing by, saying, "Tell him what you did to her. Tell him." We know what that's about. And then, Shireen. And then it shows Bran, and it shows Dany and Tyrion, and that's about it.
It's probably going to be lame.
I'm sure it'll be great. It won't be like this episode, but I think it'll be pretty good. This season's been good, right?
Amazing. You think we're going to lose another major character next week?
Ooh, maybe Cersei.
That would be crazy.
Yeah, that would be. All right, I'm calling Duncan back.
Send the Raven.
That's a good idea. Caw.
Oh, it'll be a week later. I'm back.
Caw.
All right, that's our show, episode 26. Thanks for listening, everybody. Before we close it out completely, I just want to remind some of you guys that our guest Harry has a show, Podcast Junkies. Can you just tell us a little bit about that show?
Yeah, it's super meta, but it's a podcast.
I was on it.
It's a podcast where I interview other interesting podcasters, and I've actually been a guest on the show, and I'm getting close to episode 100. It's been 2+ years.
Awesome.
You got big plans?
Congratulations.
Yeah, I actually was able to wrangle an interview with my guest number 1, Chase Reeves, and we had just a totally random, off-the-cuff conversation for an hour and a half. It's a lot of fun.
It's really cool. You should check that out, Duncan.
I've heard a couple episodes. Yeah, it's fun.
Oh, good. Yeah. So he's one of my favorite interviewers, and I love that you have some questions and you do your research, but it's also super casual and impromptu, and you just kind of let it go where what seems most natural and interesting. So it's very cool.
Yeah, good stuff.
That's at podcastjunkies.com. Is that right?
Correct.
Cool. And if you want to call us, you can call us at 813-563-3739. That's 813-JOFFREY.
If you'd like to write in, you can email us at game@podcastic.com.
Check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/GOM podcast.
Be sure to check out our other great podcasts at podcastica.com. Podcast Junkies is on there. There's a pretty cool Walking Dead podcast on there and some other stuff. Next week on this podcast, we'll have me, David, and Mr. Blog.
David Benioff?
What?
Sure. No, David as in Mr. Karen.
Nice.
All right, that's our show.
Thanks for listening.
We never demand, but we're up for anything, really.
Happy shitting.
Happy shitting. I love that.